Well, our next speaker is Dr. Byron Johnson. Dr. Johnson's a sociologist and criminologist. He's Distinguished Professor of the Social Sciences at Baylor and is the founding director of ISR, of the Baylor Institute for Studies of Religion. He also serves as director of the program on pro-social behavior. Dr. Johnson is probably a leading authority in the world on the impact of faith-based programs on prisoner reentry and recidivism reduction, and he's best known for his book, More God, Less Crime, Why Faith Matters and How It Could Matter More, which was published by Templeton a couple years ago. Dr. Johnson is going to speak on the myth of American piety.
Okay. Let me start off by saying that, as Rod Stark said earlier, you can't go by a month or a week or probably even a day without hearing something in the news about the decline of religion. And so to start the paper off today, what I thought I'd do is to say that these are a bunch of newspaper articles and stories related to religion. And we just did this the other day, and we said, let's look for anything that deals with the decline or the reduction in religion, the falling away of faith. And we got a lot of hits. These are all very recent articles, and I love the names of some of these articles, okay? So let me just read a couple of them. The Dying Right, Why Christian Fundamentalists Are in Panic Mode. How the Internet is Taking Away Americans' Religion. Why Are Millennials Unfriending Organized Religion? Is God Dead? 7.5 million Americans lose their religion since 2012. 6 reasons religion is dying. Ministers weigh options amidst major religious decline, and on it goes. So we also did a check for the rise of religion in any recent newspaper stories. And you know how many hits we got? 1. The article was on atheism, the rise of atheism. So we found no articles on the rise of religion, and I think you've already heard today there's every reason to believe that religion is alive and well in many parts of the world, but it's not a story that we hear played out. And you can't blame the secular media on this, because if you look here, whoops, let me pull that back. I think I have a laser here somewhere. Well, always come prepared. Look at this. Okay, see these yellow highlights? These are religious publications that are talking about the decline and the demise of religion. The ones that are not in yellow are secular news outlets. So who's telling the story about America's decline? Everybody is. And I think it's incredibly misleading. We also can find a few other things out. If you look at each of these articles, they don't talk about the methodology of these stories. In fact, some of these are based on an interview or two that they've done with someone, and yet they publish an article on the decline of religion. Very few of them cite data. Some of them actually cite data, but very few. And I think one of the problems is when you talk about this to ministers and to other people, they don't know the difference between what is legitimate and not, what is good research and what is bad research. And so I want to talk for a few seconds about that. One of the things, if you hear a study and you think that headline just doesn't make sense to me, it may not be a good study. You may want to take a closer look. Take a look at the footnotes. You might want to see if the methods section describes how they did their study and was it done with any rigor. Was the study published anywhere? Was it published in a referee journal or in a peer-reviewed journal? And what you find is that in almost all of these cases, they have not been published in a reputable outlet. Many of them don't have data. So let me talk about where do these studies come from? Where does all these news accounts, how are they based? Well, one of my favorites is the Barna Group. The Barna Group cranks out a study, it seems like every month, and we have to kind of debunk most of those studies. And so let's just talk about one of them. they had a study that came out a couple of years ago called Unchristian, and a book came out with the study. And it's really interesting because if you look at that book and you look at the methodology that they used, what they did is they went and interviewed people who had left the church. And the book reveals how, quote, unchristian people who attend church happen to be. So I think the methods there are just a little bit problematic. And then they use a snowball sample. So if I can find someone who's had a rotten experience in church and they've left church and they have not gone back to church, let me find that person and ask them what's wrong with the people who still go. And then can you tell me the name of somebody else who's had a similar situation like yours? So this is the project Unchristian. They have done other projects like this. Their newest one is called Churchless. This is really interesting. This is based on 20 different surveys conducted between 2008 and 2014 that they have done. And Churchless refers to their work on the unchurched in America. Well, at ISR, we're very much interested in the unchurched. But just exactly how do they define the unchurched? This is a quote, and this was just released in March. The unchurched are those who haven't attended church in the past 6 months. That's the definition. And here's another quote. One of the most remarkable findings is that unchurched people are not always unbelievers. Isn't that staggering? In fact, most aren't. The majority of the unchurched they call non-practicing Christians. So they claim Christianity as their faith, but they haven't been to church in a long time. This is terrible research. By any indication, of course it's not published anywhere except they publish their own reports and their videos that they sell to churches, and pastors preach using their data. I can't tell you how many sermons I've had to sit under listening to Barna findings, and then when I go out and meet people, they ask me if I can believe these findings. Their latest is on atheism. So what they do is they ask people questions about whether or not you're an atheist or you're agnostic, and so Barna decided, why don't we just lump those two together, and we'll call them skeptics. Okay, so they now take a look at the unchurched, who are unchurched people who haven't been to church in 6 months, and they come out with this finding: skeptics represent 1/4 of all unchurched adults. I do not know what to make of that finding. It makes absolutely no sense. And then they throw this in there. From 1993 to 2013, the percent of women who claim to be skeptics has increased from 16% to 43%. This resonates with absolutely none of the literature, period. Let me just give you some of the key findings from some of their other research. It's not all Barna. There are other people in there too, but mainly from the Barna group. Young people are leaving the church. Women are leaving the faith. Divorce is as common among the religious as it is the irreligious. Americans are less likely to believe in God with each passing year. Americans pray less and practice their faith less than in previous years. Church attendance is plummeting. Young evangelicals are becoming theologically liberal. Colleagues of mine here at Baylor did a study with me, which we published in the Journal for the Scientific Study of Religion, completely debunking that one. Atheism is on the rise among Americans. Rodney Stark and I published a piece in the Wall Street Journal debunking that one. Atheism has been consistent for 7 decades, around 4%. I had a minister in Dallas whose name you would know if I told you, who regularly said that atheism has increased tenfold in the last 30 years, until he visited our website. Then he realized he had been giving bad information. Thankfully, he went out and started telling people he had been getting it wrong all these years. My favorite one of theirs is, we are 1 generation removed from a godless youth society. We debunked that one in a Wall Street Journal op-ed as well. The reason why it's problematic is, A, it's not true. It's completely inaccurate. And reporters call us to ask us, what we think about these findings all the time, and we have to explain to them why they're bad. Another culprit is the American Religious Identification Survey. The acronym is ARIS. It's been conducted 3 times. And they ask this question: what is your religion? That's it. Now, this is one question tacked on to a large survey. It's not their survey. They purchase one item. It's not a bad approach to take. So you may be filling out a survey. What do you like? Do you like crunchy peanut butter or smooth? Do you use unleaded gas, it's the high octane or the low octane? Oh, by the way, what's your religion? Now, if someone asks you, what is your religion, what's your answer to that? Some of you may have to struggle for a second to figure that out. I remember when we moved to Waco, we were visiting churches, and we were just going for a walk in our neighborhood, my wife and I, and someone pulled us over. They were out in their garden, and they said, "Are you the people that just moved in down the corner?" And we said, "Yes." They go, "Really? What's your religion?" And I remember thinking, well, we don't even have a church home yet. And I go, "We're evangelical." And he goes, "What do you mean by that?" And I thought, well, do I tell him what the definition is for an evangelical? But clearly I had ruffled some feathers. The point is, it's very difficult when someone asks you what is religion and they don't give you any other category to make a conclusion based on it. One question in ARIS. The Baylor Religion Survey, which some of you know a little bit about because it's done here at Baylor with colleagues from the sociology department in collaboration with ISR, with funding from the Templeton Foundation, and I actually wanted to, I'll show you something in a minute. This is just the publicity that we got in 6 months on the first wave of the Baylor Religion Survey. It got a huge amount of coverage. We asked between 350 and 400 questions on religion. The ARIS survey asked 1. And yet, they were cited all over the place for their claims that religion was in decline in America. The Baylor Religion Survey, the most extensive and sensitive study of American religion ever conducted, and asked all kinds of questions, fielded by the Gallup organization, who we've worked with on projects for many years. So there's a big difference. This is what it looks like, by the way. You can access this in any number of, you can even get the data at the ARDA, but you can also download the whole study if you'd like to get it. And what did we do with our study? We published it in refereed journals. This is the Journal for the Scientific Study of Religion. It's kind of the flagship publication for religion in the social sciences, and the whole issue was dedicated to studies coming from Baylor. Several books came out of that as well. America's Four Gods, what Rodney Stark's book, What Americans Really Believe, that the whole team here at Baylor contributed to. So we tried to publish as best we can, and as I indicated, we got a lot of research findings covered in the major media outlets. This is a Time piece, this is a Newsweek piece, and all these other articles here that I showed you a minute ago. So we got a lot of coverage, but the interesting thing is, I never liked most of it. There's incredibly positive findings in the Baylor Religion Survey, and most of that didn't get covered. What gets covered is the goofy and the cynical. This is just one table from our study, and if you look at that pie chart, it's a breakdown of the religious affiliation of Americans. See the biggest piece of the pie? Evangelical affiliated, that's what that is. It's the biggest piece of the pie, represents about 100 million Americans, and to my recollection, we didn't get any coverage on that. Zip. I would think that's a pretty important finding. And probably, as you know, that one neighbor that asked me if I was an evangelical, he'd probably be petrified at the size of that number. So what do we know about American religion? Well, we do know quite a bit. Here's a look at the main line. And guess what? It's shrinking. you can see these congregations here, there are definitely some declines. And in fact, I'll tell you what the numbers look like. We've seen a 49% drop in membership in mainline Protestant denominations between 1960 and 2000. So this is not a conference where we're trying to do anything but to give you the facts. The facts are the main line is shrinking, or as Rodney Stark likes to say, the main line's becoming the sideline in America. But there are denominations that are growing. Membership in evangelical denominations increased by 156% during the same time period as the drop in the main line. So what does this mean? It means that there's a lot of volatility. At the same time, there's this stability in American religion. There are winners and there are losers. So let's look at church attendance, since many of those articles on that first slide were about America's great decline. Some of the articles were entitled America's Empty Pews. Well, what do we know about attendance? There, if you look at this chart, this goes from the mid-1950s up until 2005, and what you see there is stability. There are some slight declines. You see in here in the middle that one category, this is post-Vatican II, where we saw, as a result, we believe, of Vatican II, a decline in church attendance among Catholics that was noticeable. But in general, the decline has been a small percentage. From 2002 to 2012, the percentage of Americans attending weekly services declined 1%. None of that has been covered in the media. What has been covered is the drastic drop. Are we becoming, as Philip Jenkins said, the next Europe? There have been studies after study and article after article on this group, the nuns. Not N-U-N-S, N-O-N-E-S. Who are these folks, the nuns? Well, several groups, ARIS, the one survey I mentioned, they weigh in heavily on this. The Pew Religious Landscape Study provide a lot of information that has been caught up in this, and of course the Baylor Religion Survey. And then, there's the General Social Survey. Here again is the ARIS, and you can see that they report a 7.7% what is your religion response, and then most recently it's up to 15%. So, there were scores of articles saying the nuns have doubled since ARIS started doing their research. I think the whole ARIS study is problematic when you ask the question, what is your religion? Let me show you how we ask the question, okay? And ours looks very much like the General Social Survey. So you see up there, you can't read it, so I'll tell you what it says. With what religion, family, do you most closely identify? And here is a big list of denominations that you can pick. And right here, it says no religion. So there are significant numbers of people that mark no religion. Some people interpret that to mean you're an atheist, or an agnostic, or Barna, you're both, you're a skeptic, because you marked no religion. But in the Baylor Religion Survey, unlike the rest of those, there's another question where we ask people to identify the name of the church if they actually attend a church. And people actually write in the name of a church, even though they put no religion. This should not come as a great surprise to us. A lot of people attend a church, they don't even know what denomination it is. How many people that go to Saddleback know it's a Baptist church? How many people go to Christ Community Church in Nashville and know that it's Presbyterian? Matter of fact, it's PCA, not Presbyterian USA. In the Baylor Religion Survey, what we found, let me show you, is that a significant number of people, we asked for religious family, denomination, and congregation. People actually gave us an address, but they put no religion. That's not being captured in these other surveys. 30.8% of those who said they don't know gave us the name of a congregation, and 9.9% of those said that they indicated they had no religion, provided a congregation. So what's happening is we're inflating the number of nuns out there. We estimated at one time that there may be an overestimate of the nuns by as many as 10 million. Well, someone asked about Pew a little bit earlier. They've done so many studies on this topic, and they do some great research, but some of their research has issues. They came out with a study a few years ago that said this: 44% of Americans have left the faith of their youth, i.e., they don't attend the church they were raised in, the religion of their parents. Scores of articles reported that people had left the faith. The research never said they left the faith. It said they don't go to the church that they were raised in. They go to a different church. This is what we call switching. Millions of people do it. They do it all the time. If you don't think you're being fed, you tend to go to a place where you think you might be fed. Let's say you have kids. You want to go to a church where there's great programs for your kids. So instead of the study coming out with articles saying Americans treat religion so seriously that they shop around for the best product that they can buy or that they can find for their families, the conclusion is that Americans are leaving the faith in droves. We think that competition is positive. We think it's healthy. It means that religion is vibrant and tends to be growing. In a pluralistic society, it's a good thing. Rodney Stark said about this, Americans mostly change churches in search of deeper, more compelling faith. It has nothing to do with the fact that they've walked away from the faith. And yet that's how the story gets told in most of the media accounts, oftentimes passed on by clergy. And then this is, by the way, we haven't given you our website, although it's up here, you can see it. This is where you can get a lot of our research and download it, and it's accessible to you. So I'll stop there and open it up for questions.
A few years ago, Dr. David Barrett used the statistic that each week 53,000 people in the Western culture leave the church. I'm not hearing that's inconsistent with some of what we're hearing, but I'd love to hear your take on that.
I just don't believe it's true. I haven't seen any indication, Jimmy, that it is true. If you look at these data sources, what you find is they footnote someone, you go there, they footnote someone, and you can never track down a data source. You may have heard this finding a couple of years ago, 100,000 Christian martyrs a year for the sake of the gospel. So we thought, 100,000 martyrs a year. So we started checking this out. And it came from people who had taken some of the conflicts in Africa and taken all the people that had died over a 10-year period and divided by the number of years to come up with 100,000 people a year. Well, first of all, these were not necessarily religious wars. We don't know exactly the faith of the people that were dying, but these were not martyrs. Rodney Stark did research on this topic because of that bad information and found that it's more like 1,000 to 2,000, which is way too many. There is persecution out there, but to say that there are 100,000 Christian martyrs a year, that should raise a red flag. Where's the footnote for that? Where was it published? Who vetted that? Who reviewed it? What was the methodology that was used? This figure that you just cited sounds totally bogus. So I would love to see a footnote for it, Jimmy. I think we have a hand right here. Oh, okay.
Just to piggyback off that, is there similar scrutiny to numbers coming out of Europe or out of other areas? You're challenging some of the methodology. What do we know about places outside of America?
Well, most of the research that we do, of course, is based here in the States. We don't, we had a hand in that China study, but and we now have access to data that the Gallup organization is doing, and as Rod mentioned in the World Poll. Most countries don't produce the kind of research that's coming out of the U.S. In fact, they look here for the studies. So I think what Philip said is that, I would agree with what he was saying about religion. Are we trying to say that religion is flourishing in Europe? That's not what we're saying, but to write it off as dead and gone just doesn't seem to line up. But again, most of the research, we're very U.S. focused on this stuff, so I wouldn't want to weigh in on the scholarship in Germany on church attendance and what it means and who's leaving the faith and are they switching and all that. I'm mainly speaking of U.S. samples. Yes.
So you didn't mention Christian Smith. What do you think of his book, Lost in Transition and Souls in Transition?
Christian Smith is a great scholar. It's a great book. And I agree with just about everything he says. The one thing that, and Chris doesn't make the argument, as Barna and others have, that youth have left the faith. It is a time of struggle for kids, for young people. What happens for a lot of kids in those years when they're going from high school into college, they don't attend. But what you don't hear is that most of them get married, have children, and go back to church. It's a cycle. But yet, I think in our country, we love to push the panic button. And it comes across really well from the pulpit. But the reality is quite the opposite. In fact, we found that young people, if you want to look at where they are theologically, they look a lot like their parents. And in fact, they're more conservative than their parents on a number of important theological and social issues. So I think to be able to, just to wipe them all off as they've lost the faith, it's just totally untrue. Ditto for women. But Christian Smith's work on youth is great. It's good stuff.
One other question. In the GSS surveys between 1976 and 2012, there's been the increase in the numbers who select the equivalent of the nuns amongst those in the 18 to 30-year-old group has increased, has more than about tripled during that period of time, which could be for a lot of different reasons, and I would like to hear what you think was the reasons why in that survey, which is the only one that's happened over that long period of time.
Yeah. Well, I think today there's more baggage with denomination than there's ever been. That's why these churches are called the Church of the Savior. They don't want to call themselves Presbyterian. There's baggage with it. And I think because of that, because of, maybe frustration with organized religion, people opt for that no religion category. We also found, by the way, that a lot of people that put no religion, when they do indicate their religion, it's high-octane religion, buddy. These are storefront churches that, used to be a mall. Now it's a church. And so I think there's a coding issue here that's problematic. I'm not denying that there are more people saying none than they used to, but I think religion has taken hits, a lot of hits, some of it justified, some of it completely unjustified. And because of that, people are less likely to mark certain categories than they used to be. I mean, when I was growing up, it wouldn't be frowned upon to indicate you're a Baptist, or you're Assembly of God. But now maybe they feel like that's a problem. Yes.
So from the research that you've done, and I'm also a big supporter, believer in numbers, but is religion growing in America? And just from my own personal survey, I've moved 3 times over the past several years. The home churches that I have been in those moves, I've seen each one of them decline. Mm-hmm. I've seen the youth leave the church.
Yeah.
How do I correlate the numbers with
Yeah.
my own experience?
Yeah. Well, let me tell you, we keep invoking Rodney Stark. So Rodney Stark was talking to a colleague of his at Cal Berkeley. And this was after Reagan had won in a landslide. And he said, I'm so frustrated. I don't know how this could have happened. I don't know one person who voted for Ronald Reagan. So where you stand depends upon where you sit. There's a lot of dead churches out there. I can take you to them. And there are a lot of thriving churches. At ISR, we want to study all of it. We want to study why they die. We want to study the satellite churches. You got churches all over Dallas, like Gateway, and a pastor that's pastoring all of those congregations and planting more. They're doing this in Washington, D.C. They're doing it all over the place. We would say that religion in America is stable. The mainline shrinking, the evangelical churches have experienced some of that growth. And, attendance is down a little bit, not much. My mom's not able to attend anymore. She watches religious programs 24 hours a day almost. And of course, Barnett would call her churchless. She's a non-practicing Christian. She prays about everything she does. So there's a sense in which, I don't know why, but there's a story that people want to tell, and that's religion is on life support. It is just not true. Americans are remarkably religious. They have been, they continue to be. The numbers are off the charts, but that's not what the media want to say. We did this in landmark study, and there were next to no articles on the fact that over half Americans have been touched in their life and protected by an angel. These are not churchgoers, these are all Americans. It's a story they didn't want to tell. So I think there's a clear bias out there, and some of it comes from people, within the churches. They want to, create a moral panic, it seems, about religion. So I guess there are different ways you can look at it. I'm being attacked by a fly. Okay. Maybe I better wrap this up. How about one more question? Yes.
Hi, I was looking at the BRS Wave 3 data just last week, and I saw something that I was wondering is this noise or is there something going on here? And that I was looking at the biblical literalism variable, and I was basically looking at percentages between men and women by age. And typically, women are going to report higher levels of biblical literalism. And I found that except in that sample, except for in the 20 to 30 range, where men are reporting higher levels of literalism. Do you see that as just noise in the data or indicative of some kind of demographic change? Or
Wow. I didn't know that finding was there. I'm not sure what to say about that. That's really very interesting. We know that women tend to be more religious than men in all of these samples, and that's a finding that's true with other religions, and it's true in other countries. But in terms of that one demographic slice that you just mentioned, I didn't know that. I have to think about it. I'm not sure if it's noise or what's going on there. Good question. Why don't I stop there?